Welcome to Grassroots Takeover, the weekly podcast bringing you voices of the people making everyday revolution. My name's Alison Playford.
And my name's Mark Weaver. You can follow Grassroots Takeover on Facebook, Twitter. You can listen to old shows and more stuff on YouTube and SoundCloud. And to become a supporter of the show, please go to patreon.com/Grassroots Takeover.
On today's show, we're looking at what the mainstream media is calling the migrant crisis and how European people have responded to it, some with aid and solidarity, and a growing number with calls for political solutions. We're going to be talking to Mona from London to Calais, one of the groups helping volunteers make the transition from simple aid giving to addressing the causes and supporting migrant-led action for lasting solutions.
So, welcome to the show. Welcome to Grassroots Takeover. It's good to have you with us. So, just to recap, we're going to talk about what has been described as the migrant crisis or the refugee crisis, depending on who you asked. It's become a massive thing in the media in the last couple of months. We've seen tens of thousands of people in London marching in solidarity. There's been huge trips to Calais in France to support people who are trapped in the camps there. And so we're going to talk about how that affects us as people and what we should do about it, how we should think about it. Those are the questions. Over to you, Ali.
Yeah, so people in the UK, particularly people elsewhere in Europe as well, have responded with so much well-intentioned compassion, wanting to take aid, wanting to take things to the people that have been forced to flee so that their suffering is alleviated as they're on that journey. Many people have got up and they've gone and they've got involved, which is a wonderful thing. But with the aid giving, my question is, where's the limit on that? At what point do we start to translate that into work that stops people ending up in this situation? That's what I'm excited about doing.
Well, we have our own experience of that as well, because we went to Calais. We went to Calais ourselves, and we delivered. We were part of a group called Bikes Beyond Borders, and we had 100 people or something cycling down. We were in a support vehicle. We delivered bikes, and we got to Calais to the camps and started speaking to people. And at that time there was 3,000. Yeah,
and I've been back more recently, and there's now around 7,000 in the camps at Calais.
It's absolutely mushroomed.
Yeah, and the camp is changing. It's almost unrecognisable just within the few weeks gap between different times that I've been over there personally. Meanwhile, 9,000 people per day are arriving on the island of Lesbos in Greece. More and more people are coming all the time. And this is why in my introduction I said what the mainstream media is calling the migrant crisis, because I think the word crisis can be a little bit distracting, because the crisis is perhaps something that is going to flare up and then disappear and actually
die down.
Yeah, and with this, it's unlikely to die down. It's the things that are causing people to flee are increasing. Therefore, more and more people will be likely to come.
Yeah, so I guess part of thinking about this is to say, well, it is a crisis in the sense that we have a poverty crisis, we have a climate crisis, we have a war and violence and nuclear weapons crisis, but these are...
Migration is an inevitable outcome of those causal factors.
Thank you. Yeah, I lost my words, absolutely. And so when you think of it in those terms, because we've got involved with aid giving, you could call it, in inverted commas. We've gone there, we've delivered bikes, we've made personal contacts with the people there, which was cool. Some people have bikes now that they didn't have, and if you've got next to nothing...
There's really nice people over there as well. It's just nice to meet people and...
Yeah, and if you have the opportunity, I think we'd definitely advise people to go do it. The aid is absolutely vitally needed on a moment-to-moment basis, but as we're sort of alluding to, what we're getting at is we need to understand this, if we want to call it a crisis, let's say a situation, we need to understand this situation as a political situation. It's not that everything was fine one moment and then suddenly it's not, and we need to, redistribute aid and goods. It's that the way our society is set up, the way power is distributed, the way that trade is organised, the way we deal with other countries deliberately, this forced migration is just a byproduct of that.
Yep. And we're going to have to deal with it as a country and as a world. We're going to have to make a way for respecting each other and for ensuring that everybody can live in peace. And also, we've been speaking to London to Calais. I'm very excited by London to Calais, the amazing group that started with taking aid over to Calais and are making huge developments in politicising that work, that action. And so, yeah, we've been speaking to Mona and we've got an interview with her coming up.
Yeah, I caught her on the bus back from a demonstration. Shall I talk about the demonstration a little bit?
Yeah.
So this was after we went to Calais ourselves to deliver bikes, and we got involved. We got on. They organised coaches from London. We got on the coaches. We went down, and about 200-300 people, something like that.
Yeah.
200-300 people marched from the centre of Dover. Down across the beach and to the port. We ended up blocking off the roundabout where all the trucks and all the traffic need to go around to get in and out of the port. So that created a huge traffic jam that went. Someone was actually telling me that what happens if you create a jam in the traffic, it actually very quickly piles up and goes all the way down the tunnel, and so it starts to pile up near the camps.
That's right.
So the effect of that action can actually be felt very quickly and seen very quickly from the camp itself. It feels like a long way away, but it's really not.
Right, and actually it's when the traffic is backed up through the area of the camp, it's much safer for people that are trying to board the trucks, because that's the reality, that people are continuously trying to board vehicles coming through the port, and when the vehicles are backed up, when they're moving a lot slower, it's a lot safer. That's a grim truth relating to that.
I didn't realise the action was going to be so effective either, because when we were blocking the roundabout, just doing what people do, chanting, singing songs, people making speeches, messages of solidarity, I heard the police over chatting to each other. The sergeant came over, he was really, really frustrated, and he said to the other police guys, he was kind of telling him off. He sort of said, he said, well, look, the longer you leave him here, we're getting a mile of traffic every minute.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? A minute every mile. Every minute it's a mile.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was an action, I think, where most people hadn't really geared themselves up to be kind of militant and confrontational. It was more a solidarity message.
Quite a gentle action.
Yeah, it was quite gentle. So a lot of people maybe don't realise quite how much impact and how much power we have. And it's such a small distance as well, like Dover to Calais itself. You think, oh well, it's so close to our shores that in fact the UK has basically shifted its border over to France.
Right.
You know, if it was much further, they probably wouldn't. But they say, well, it's so close. It's only a couple of miles of road. We can happily stick our own border force on the other side of the water.
Yeah.
So yeah, why don't we listen to Mona from London to Calais on the bus back from the demonstration?
Okay.
So I'm speaking to, what is your name?
Mona. So I'm one of the organisers of London to Calais. We actually just started off about 2 months ago with me and my husband thinking about going to Calais to hand out food, and we very quickly got a bunch of activists together, and now we're a group of, I would say, almost 150 people, and we try and coordinate regularly food transports to people living in the refugee camp in Calais.
So many of the people that I've spoken to who are taking a new interest in this topic, they want to do the first thing that's available to them. It could be donating shoes, donating money, that kind of thing, and that's how you guys started. But you've moved on from just donating supplies, and could you talk about that and the political nature of what you do?
Yes, so I mean, we started really off from a practical point of view, but I think we realized always from the very beginning that this was at its root was a political crisis. I mean, the fact that people came all the way over here from places like Afghanistan and Syria is partly because of the British imperialist wars that started the crisis there, and so for the UK now to turn around and to completely close its borders when there's the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War is just not acceptable. And the thing is, we can hand out as much food as we want, but the problem in the end is that the French and the British state can move in at any time and close the jungle down. And if you see the living situations there, this is not a normal crisis. We live in fairly wealthy countries. Both France and the UK are very wealthy. So the people there are living in worse than third world conditions, and they're being consciously kept there in this state because the governments refuse to acknowledge the crisis. So we really need to move beyond taking the role of a state in terms of handing out food and making this a political campaign. That doesn't mean that we can't hand out the food. I think we still need to do that whilst the government is failing to do it. But in the long run, what we really want to do is pressure the government to take responsibility.
So another side to this story is the fact that the UK already houses refugees who are in detention centres, isn't it? It's a huge number of people in Yarlswood and in Harmondsworth. Now, when people come across the border, is that what they have to look forward to, like detention centres for indefinite? Well, it's basically a prison term, isn't it? But it's just not called that.
Yes, I mean there are some cases of people literally being kept in prisons and for indefinite term. So there's people that have tried to commit suicide and going on hunger strike because they have no way of getting out there. Like, literally, it's completely surreal. But they have not committed any other crime than just crossing a border without holding the right passport, and they're being kept in indefinite prison without any accusation, without any proper legal support. It's completely against any imagination of rights that we think we have. I think we need to tackle that problem. I mean, if you look at other countries in Europe, you can see a completely different approach. There's universities offering free studies, there's trainee programs, because in the end, if these people were allowed to work and allowed to have a normal life, then we wouldn't waste massive amounts of resources on prisons that just don't pretty it's not fair, and B, it doesn't make any sense to keep people there. So
I've spoken to a lot of activists on the march today, and they basically have a standpoint that the border system, the UK border specifically, but also just the border system in general in Europe, is just at its heart racist. I don't know, what are your comments on that? And maybe for the listener, if you could unpack that idea that the borders are just simply racist.
Yes, I think I generally agree with that idea. I mean, the problem is if you go beyond. I mean, let's start off with Europe and the idea of freedom of movement, which I think is a great idea. But the only reason why it was set up is because European capitalists, the European coal and steel community, wanted to have, they set up this European integration project, and that's how it all started, with the European industry having an interest in people being allowed to freely move across across borders. But so it
was about workers being able to move from country to country to facilitate steel and coal.
Yes, and also to keep wages at a certain level. I think that's the idea behind it. I mean, they were thinking that they can play people out against each other with that. But it can also work in our interest. It's a contradictory force, because as a European, I've benefited from that right, and I think that's something we need to still fight for. But where do we draw the line? I mean, what the European Union has done in practice is that for the white people, or the people that happen to have the right passport, there's a freedom of movement within a really limited space. But for everyone else around it, they've set up Frontex, a really vicious frontier border agency that literally drowns people in the Mediterranean. That's what they've been doing for the past decade, and it's really vicious, and it's created a massive slaughter basically there. And I mean, what we're seeing now is just the culmination of a process that's been going on for many years. And that is essentially racist. Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, if you say only these certain ethnic groups of people can move around wherever they want, but everyone else is free from doing it, then yeah, what else is it supposed to be?
I suppose for some people it's clearest when they ask themselves if the people drowning in boats in the Mediterranean were white, would they be described as cockroaches? In the mainstream media, this type of thing.
Yes, I mean. That's certainly true, and I mean also, if you put yourself in their position, they can't book a ticket from Turkey or from a Middle Eastern country and just fly over here, because the European Union passed laws that bans them from actually, the airlines are not allowed to take them on the plane and take them over. Because the safest way, surely, for them to come here would be to just like we would do. If you would want to go to Turkey right now, you'd book an EasyJet flight, and for less than 100 quid, you'd be in Istanbul. But sadly, that option isn't open for them. And if we ask why, because there's an apartheid system that's blocking them from doing it.
On that question, I mean, most people are brought into this. I'm kind of going full circle back to my first question, if you like. most people are brought into this with a very ahistorical, apolitical perspective on it. What they're told is that there suddenly is a humanitarian crisis. There wasn't before, so what do you do with a humanitarian crisis? You feed the people who are hungry, you shelter the people who need shelter and stuff. Now, of course, I know that you're not saying, oh, we should stop providing shelter, we should stop providing food, but you're essentially saying that what you believe, I guess, people need to do is fundamentally challenge the European control over its borders and how its borders are operated. I suppose, would you advocate, open borders to the UK? What's your vision of what that would look like in a just way?
Absolutely, I would advocate just open borders, and I think there is a just way of managing it, because if the European states all open their borders and all have relatively similar conditions, then it should be fair for people to come in, and if people were given the right to actually come to the countries, then it would be a massive benefit. I mean, that's largely the reason why Germany opened its borders, is because all the Western countries have a massive demographic problem. Aging populations, their pension systems are crumbling. They need workers to come and work in their factories. And for Germany, it was pure economic self-interest. It's not because they're any much nicer people, but the German capitalists, so to say, the German bosses want more workers. So I think what we need to have is a process of opening all the borders, but at the same time fighting for economic justice, because all the people that come and say, oh, there's not enough resources, we don't have enough houses as it is, which is a really common argument in Britain. But that is not because of the migrants coming in, that's because of the Tory party completely letting people down with their austerity measures. So it has to be a simultaneous process of, yes, opening all the borders, which is economically beneficial, and fighting against austerity, fighting for economic wealth redistribution, taxing the rich more. I think that's how we have to tackle the problem.
And so one final question then, what do you say to people who say, well, we need to keep the borders closed because it's a security threat. We need to protect the security of the country, so therefore we should, the migrants trapped on the other side of the borders is unfortunate, but we need the borders to protect us from, ISIS and all these other threats.
I don't think that's in any way based on reality. I mean, Germany is just they're expecting to have 1.5 million migrants, and there's no way for them to in any way keep an eye on who that is. Have we seen any massive bombings recently in Germany? Do people feel scared? My village where I'm from, there are suddenly 50 Sudanese people, a bunch of Pakistani people. No one's feeling scared. They're just these are normal people. Those that say that there's a security threat, I want to show them to me, the actual things that have happened that could be considered a threat. Even if there are a couple of people that might not share, the same norms and values as you do in any way, or that might be really strictly religious or something. I mean, you're not gonna stop the problem by letting everyone else drown in the sea. I mean, that's not solving any problems. Let everyone in and deal with it. I mean, we haven't seen any threats so far, so that's just a cheap excuse, I would say.
All right, well, thanks for talking and congratulations on the demo.
Yeah, thanks.
So that was Mona from London to Calais, and all the links for London to Calais will be beneath the blog post, beneath the YouTube post, wherever you're watching this podcast. You can click on links to them. London to Calais is a really fantastic group that has a lot of plans in motion and is a very important group to watch as we follow this progress of the aid efforts becoming politicised. They really have some exciting things to come. So, big props to London to Calais. They're very cool.
Yeah, so when I spoke to Mona, I really felt like she had an articulate vision of how we need to open the borders, house people, let them integrate. And really, it's about rights. It's about saying you need to have the rights that everybody needs to be able to get on in society, and that way you're not dependent on aid, compassion, and so on. Nothing wrong with aid and compassion, but forcing people to be dependent upon it is, I think, what we're against. And the other aspect of this is kind of what's causing this so-called crisis, or let's say just situation, the reason people are migrating. We know that when we went to the camp in Calais, I remember there was lots of people from Libya,
Mm-hmm.
You know, a couple of years ago, we bombed the place. Turned it from a stable dictatorship, was a dictatorship, but a stable one, into a scene of total chaos, where people can't predict what's going to happen to them day by day. So now we've got this huge flow of Libyan refugees or migrants, whatever you want to call them, Libyan people. So this is just one aspect, but if you look at all the other places, Eritrea, Sudan, Afghanistan, these are all places where we are either directly invading or we are invading economically. We're imposing all sorts of neoliberal structural adjustment programs, they're called. Sorry for the technical stuff. It's basically where we go into countries and just say, sell off all of your public goods, let our corporations come in, we'll extract the profit and send it back home, and to deal with that crisis, we'll just put you into debt, more debt, more debt, more debt. And so these countries stay in poverty. It doesn't matter how much aid we give in terms of comic relief, in terms of Oxfam, the situation remains the same.
Right, and those things, comic relief, that type of thing, can be seen, and I don't entirely subscribe to this view, but I do have a lot of sympathy with it, as panacea, as little plasters to put across the wound, which disguise the much wider problem, which is that these situations come about and are created by imperialist powers, by the West. I remember I wrote a blog post on this when I first returned from Calais. It's on my website, aliplayford.com, if anyone would like to read it. And lots of people commented. It was shared very widely and lots of people commented. And one comment I got on the blog post was, why are you saying that migration is a result of imperialism when people are leaving Syria because of ISIS and because of Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian government leader? So, how can this be the fault of the West? How can this be our fault? And, well, that's a failing in analysis and understanding, basically, because we can talk about the reasons ISIS was created, we can talk about the Iraq war, we can talk about all, the terrible situation that's been created in the Middle East, we can talk about how the people's uprisings, the Arab Spring, was crushed by dictatorships which are propped up by the West. The
list is just endless.
It's just endless. And the fact is that if the West hadn't created the conditions for this to happen, it wouldn't be happening, and that's what we need to address. Partly there's a way of seeing it, which is, instead of contributing what we think is positive things, our aid, we could simply withdraw our warmongering, we could simply withdraw our financial abuse, we could simply withdraw our climate pollution, our climate change pressure.
I think one of the reasons people find this maybe challenging, is because we're all expected to make no separation between us as people and, say, the British state. Because that's really what comic relief is all about. I mean, like, it's funny because as far as British people are concerned, they are compassionate, they're generous, they don't want to see people starving and hungry, so they give their own money to relief efforts, whilst what is not explained in comic relief is that a huge amount of the poverty they're trying to alleviate is caused by British foreign policy, which comes from the government and the state. So, yeah, I mean...
So people's goodness is willfully misdirected by misinformation about why problems are created.
It's a class thing, I mean, it's the ruling classes, if you like, of our own country imposing poverty on other people and then going to the working classes of our own country to alleviate it through generosity, but maintaining that system all the way. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we wanted to end with was because, with a big complicated picture like that, I mean, I think it can be like, well, how do we get it right? How do we contribute in the way that is going to really look at the problem properly? And we think, I guess, the best way to begin is to really go to the perspective of the migrants themselves, the people who are facing this situation, and listening to what they are saying and supporting the efforts they make.
Right, we're much more likely to be able to be in solidarity and of assistance to people when we listen to them, not when we listen to the Daily Mail or the government.
So we've had huge... I suppose you could call them rebellions, direct actions, where in Hungary they imposed ridiculously draconian, even to the point where our own government and other governments were condemning it for being racist and so on, sort of policies of strict, violent border control and so on. And people just decided they couldn't tolerate it, and there was, I think it was several thousand people en masse crossing the border illegally and walking out in public.
Right, people just got up and walked as a direct action. They took their fate into their own hands, and they got up and walked. And these great freedom marches are comparable to the freedom marches and the freedom rides of the 60s, where members of the civil rights movement in America took their fate into their own hands and demanded and took their own liberation. And that's what the people that have been forced to flee, the people that are migrating, are doing today. They're taking their liberation into their own hands, and we must stand with them. We must support them as much as possible. And they've got the absolute right to freedom, just as the American freedom marches had the absolute right to freedom.
And next week's show, we're going to continue with that theme. We're going to be speaking to Movement for Justice. They are a UK-based migrant refugee-led campaign, and they are campaigning not only for justice for people crossing borders, but they're also campaigning for the release and rights of people who the UK has already absorbed. And what do we do with them when they come to our wonderful land of opportunity? We slam them in detention centres. One's near Heathrow, one's in Yarl's Wood. Horrendous conditions. They have no rights. They're kept there indefinitely. So we're going to be speaking to Movement for Justice, who have been doing amazing, inspiring solidarity work and building a movement to get them released and get them the rights they need.
Yeah. They asked me to use their full name, Movement for Justice by any means necessary.
Sorry.
Their full name.
My apologies. The shorthand, Movement for Justice by any means necessary.
That's a very important part.
Yeah, very important part. So thanks for tuning in this time. Thanks for listening. Share this podcast around. Support the show. Just to remind you, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud. We've got absolutely everything. And be a supporter. Support us in our work. Support us so we can cover more grassroots action. Go to patreon.com/grassroots takeover. See you next time.
See you next week.